Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us at the Center for Creative Photography this afternoon. My name is Todd Tabutis, and I am the director of the center, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's program. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona, including the Center for Creative Photography, is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Otham and Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. 2 weeks ago, we celebrated the opening of Luis Carlos Bernal Retrospectiva, and today we are delighted to have another exhibition opening to celebrate, Chicana Photographers LA, with an exclamation point. Don't forget that, it has an exclamation point at the end. Yes. The exhibition's curator and today's panel moderator, Sybil Venegas, originally presented this exhibition in Los Angeles in 2017. We were thrilled when she accepted our invitation to reconsider and remount it here at CCP 7 years later as a complement to our presentation of Bernal's work. Together, the exhibitions span nearly 75 years of photography that has been made by Latinx and Chicanx photographers. I must express my sincere thanks to the entire staff here at the center. Who's a staff member? Raise your hand. Please thank them. 2 terrifically engaging exhibitions opened in 1 month. And also, I must acknowledge the support of our corporate sponsor, Bank of America, whose contribution is making this program possible, as well as a slate of programs in the community over the coming months. After the conversation ends here in the auditorium, please join us in the lobby for a reception and a chance to be one of the first to see Chicana Photographers LA. In a moment, you will hear from Denise Brito, the center's Learning and Engagement Manager. But first, it is my sincere pleasure to invite to the podium Dr. Marla Franco, Vice President of Hispanic Serving Initiatives at the University of Arizona. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Franco.
Good afternoon. It is a sincere pleasure to be here on a wonderful weekend to really showcase some phenomenal photography, some phenomenal artists. My name, once again, is Marla Franco. I serve as the inaugural Vice President for Hispanic Serving Institution Initiatives. And this particular invitation to provide a greeting and a welcome on behalf of the University of Arizona is extra special. I've been here at the University of Arizona now for about 11 years. And prior to that, I came from my hometown, born and raised in Southern California, in a city called Baldwin Park. So growing up in the heart of Los Angeles, is home to me. And so to bring a piece of home to Tucson, Arizona, and particularly to the University of Arizona and the Center for Creative Photography is something special. As part of the HSI, the Hispanic Serving Institution designation, one of the things that we aim to do, and what I love about it, is that it's not just my work, it's everyone's shared commitment to the work. And so a program and a showcase like today is a real manifestation of the collective ownership of being a Hispanic serving institution. So I'm deeply honored to have this exhibit come to the University of Arizona, deeply honored to have you gather and join with us today. And I can't wait to hear more of the conversation. But thank you so much for gracing us with the artwork, with the photography, and with your presence and conversation. So thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Denise.
Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Brito. I am the Learning and Engagement Manager here at the Center for Creative Photography. It's been a true pleasure working with Sybil Venegas, the curator of this remarkable exhibition. Let's take a moment to give her a round of applause. We are thrilled to begin today's panel featuring photographers Christina Fernandez, Star Montana, Amina Cruz, and Sandra Loza. Each of whom bring a unique and powerful perspective to the field. We also honor Laura Aguilar, whose work is featured in this exhibition and in her solo show, News in Nature, at the Phoenix Art Museum. And of course, a special thanks to Raquel Gutierrez up in the audience, who is a poet, and her poetry is in the exhibition. We hope that today's conversation is both inspiring and challenging. Thank you for joining us, and please welcome our panelists.
I'm going to start out first by saying thank you to the Center for Creative Photography and the University of Arizona for inviting us to share the work and bring the show from LA. Like Todd said, it came originally from a show at Occidental College in 2017. This is the same show with the same artists, but different work, updated work. And I think it looks pretty good here. So thank you for coming. And we're going to have not that long of a panel. We were going to be done around 3 o'clock, but I have a few questions and the artists will hopefully engage in a conversation. And I want to start off by asking all of the artists, and we'll probably for this one, probably just go down the line, to tell us about your practice. How did you become a photographer, and what prominent themes and has your work explored over the course of your career? Also, if you could include any influences that have inspired you as well. So we'll start with Christina.
Pass that mic down.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. So how did I start off as a photographer? My father was sort of a hobbyist photographer and gave me my first camera when I was like 6 years old, but I didn't know how to use it, so I took terrible photographs with it. And then later, I went to UCLA. I was an undergrad there and tried to get out of my photography class because I didn't think it would be for me. And my counselor said, no, you have to take photography. So I did, and I ended up with a really amazing teacher by the name of Joyce Neimanis. Maybe some of you guys know her. Amazing educator, beautiful woman, and really interesting artist. And she kind of recognized that what I was doing in my first photography class was kind of out of the box, a little bit different from what other students were doing, and she really encouraged me to continue. So then when I went to CalArts, I went with the emphasis on photography and studied with Alan Sekula. And that was pretty life-changing as well. So, and Alan, of course, is probably one of my clearest and longest standing connections to photographers who do political work. I thought that he did it very, very well, and I learned a lot from him. So he's one of my influences for sure. And then I'd have to say Hannah Wilke and her performative work and the work that she did when she was dying is especially actually influencing me now at this late date in my life and delving into my body as a woman and an aging woman and some of the new work that I'm doing. So, yeah.
Hi. So I got started, I've always been incredibly shy, incredibly inward, and I was in the punk scene with my friends, and so I really liked disposable cameras. I really liked documenting life with my friends, and I really like to show my experience. I grew up in Boyle Heights, which is like sort of a subsection of East LA, I always say. And I remember a friend of mine got out of the punk scene and I saw them at a party that they were having at their house. And I asked them like, why aren't you around anymore? And they sort of like, I mean, the way they said it is like, you know, they had escaped, right? So they weren't kind of destroying their life anymore like the rest of us. And I was like, well, what are you doing now? And they're like, I'm at East LA College. And I was like, oh, like doing what? And they said photography. Then they showed me all their work that they had been doing at the East LA photo department. And it was amazing. It was like stepping into another realm. And I always had been doing disposable cameras. And so I was like, can I do this? She's like, yeah, anybody can. So I remember I was in high school, but I was like in a home study school. So I signed up, and I remember I always tell my students, like, I failed my first 2 semesters there, but I'm really tenacious. I don't take no for an answer. And a lot of the reason why I failed was because my professors did not really understand my work. I was showing what my existence was at the time. So if they asked for like a still life, I would photograph like a spray can. Or if they asked for a portrait, it was like my friend tagging or a punk scene. And they were just like, this is not what we're asking for. I'm like, but this is my reality. And during that time, like they would show us influences, like they would show us Richard Avedon, and they would show us Ansel Adam, which I love for the technique, but I'm like, this is not me. I want to see something that represents me. And so I remember this is like really kind of when Ash Jeeves was leaving and Google was like really rudimentary. So I used to like tag in East LA photography, like just really. And so I remember there was only this one photographer that I saw, which was Joseph Rodriguez. And so he was a really big influence early on. But now, like, I see that there's so many other people that are now in the canon of that were doing work since, right, Boyle Heights, since LA, that there's always been Latinx, BIPOC people. So like early on, it was really hard to find people like me. I was like, how can there not be other people of color that have ever made work? How could it only be a white canon? And I just kind of refused to believe that. But yeah, that's kind of how I got started. And I always tell my students I failed, but here I am, So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amina. And the way I got started in photography was actually just looking at work when I was around 10, 11, looking at magazines. And I was initially saw war photography, like Time magazine, Life magazine. And my home wasn't a space that you could show emotion. You had to be very, very stoic. And when I would look at these images, especially from the Vietnam War, I felt so much. And through photography, it allowed me to have a really rich internal life that was safe and that I could explore through work. And so I would go to the library, go to bookstores, and I would just look at every photo book I could find. I did that for years. And then also my father, he was a FBI agent, and he left his camera that he used for surveillance home because he lived in Miami. He lived in Miami and we lived in Tampa because his job was so dangerous. We couldn't live with him. And then my parents ended up getting divorced and I kept the camera. And when I started shooting for the first time, I remember the first thing I photographed was a bunch of magazines laid out on my cajon. And I didn't know at the time it was the aperture, and I took a same photo in every single, 2.5, whatever, 4, 8. And I remember getting the photo back and being like, oh, wait, I can control this. And ever since then, I can't stop. So, and I also want to say my influences were photography, but I didn't have access to. I also never saw brown photographers, and so it was like Man Ray, Freelander, very traditional white male. I love Minor White still to this day, major influence. And it wasn't until later when I started to really cultivate my own creative practice that I was exposed to other photography.
So good afternoon. My name is Sandra de la Loza. First off, I just want to give thanks for all those who paved the way so that we could be sitting here together. This is a very historic panel. So thank you, Sybil, for curating for who knows, decades to create that space, and to create space so that we are historicized and also we can publicly be in conversation. And also my colleagues now retired in Chicano studies who also created that space. So I want to recognize that I'm here because of the work and labor and vision of others who paved the way for us. So my journey to photography also began at ELAC. My first photo class was at ELAC, East LA Community College. I was actually a student at UC Berkeley, and I was on my way to study abroad in Mexico City for a year. And I took in the summer, my mom bought me a 35 millimeter camera, and I took a class at ELAC. And so it was at a time, the camera was really a friend, a partner, a witness on my own journey of self-discovery and understanding myself across, by returning to the motherland and understanding myself historically, transhistorically, and also across geographies. And Mexican culture had been in many ways very divorced from my upbringing. My parents were born and raised in Los Angeles. They were Pachucos from the 40s. They grew up and were raised in a segregated city. They couldn't eat in certain restaurants. They couldn't live in certain areas of the city because segregation was legalized. And so they intentionally kind of cut off that part of us. So on one level, like going to Mexico was an opening, a portal to a part of me that I had been divorced from. And so the camera was a kind of witness in that journey. And it was like a really incredible journey. And at the same time, this is the late 80s, early 90s. So it's also the era of the rise of what we now call the prison industrial complex. It's also a moment in which crack entered the United States, and there's a lot of addiction. It's an era of increased police violence. And also, growing up in LA, the image factory, it's also an era where whole sectors of the city were criminalized, and especially Black and brown youth were criminalized. So I was also contending with a lot of violences. So a lot of people I grew up with, I'd see in downtown LA, and they had lost themselves to addictions, or my generation was impacted by that school to prison pipeline. And so I was contending with all these violences. And so the camera was a way for me to kind of sort that out and kind of name that as I was politicizing myself. So in terms of influences, so many. Mexico City was incredible. So it introduced me to art historiographies that I wasn't introduced to in the United States. So some of the photographers I was learning about were the street photographers, like from Nacho Lopez, Manuel Alvarez Bravo, to Yolanda Andrade, Lourdes Grove, Iturbide at that time. I was also got turned on to the Japanese photographers of the post-war era. So also photographers contending with social crises and finding a photographic aesthetic language to maneuver through very difficult times. So those have been my inspiration. I have simultaneously always been a participant in grassroots community organizing. I graduated from Berkeley in '92, 3 weeks after the riots. And immediately came home and just joined young people creatively organizing and responding to that context. So I was introduced to a lot of radical art practices through activist spaces. So that's how I learned about like the situationist and the derive. Or also got connected to grassroots art activism that was generationally passed down from the Black Power movement, the Chicano movement of the 60s. So that was kind of I would consider that my first art school. I actually did not study art as an undergrad. I was a Chicano studies major. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. I think what happened right now when all these artists were speaking is it really spoke to the experience of artists of color. And if this was a different kind of panel, a lot of these issues wouldn't have come up. Issues like trying to find yourself, trying to deal with whatever was missing as a result of the world that we grew up in and the way we were socialized, and segregation, discrimination, racism. These are all things that kind of formed all of us here on this panel, and probably a lot of you in the audience. And when you become an artist, those are the things that you either are going to use art to work through, or your art is going to go back and honor. Like I think Sandra said, that we're sitting here because of a lot of people that came before us, that you're going to use your art to honor those people and to recognize those people for them helping you get to where you are today, and to all of us sitting on this panel right now here in Arizona as a result of the exhibit. I have another question that I want to put out, and it has to do with actually all of your artwork, but to put it in a question, many of you present Los Angeles and Southern California in general in your work. Much of the work we see in Chicana Photographers LA, seems to be documentary while at the same time performative in diverse ways. Can you discuss the performative and/or documentary nature of your work? You want to start, Sandra?
Yeah. Well, the performative and documentary nature of the work of my work, it's been present from the beginning. So my early work, I was documenting my travels through Mexico, and at the same time protest against police violence in Los Angeles, street actions addressing proposed anti-immigration legislation in Los Angeles, and a lot of underground youth subcultures. And immediately, like I was kind of frustrated with straight photography, and so I began experimenting. And also was frustrated with traditional portraiture. So I began projecting my own personal archive onto my body in these experimental performative portraits, and I was always kind of suspicious and doubtful of the photograph's ability to document and the kind of focus on the outside, the visible, the physiognomy. So I wanted to get to the underlayers, and also I was always kind of also pushing up against the photography's its characteristics of fixing an image. And so I wanted more complicated stories and more complicated ways of talking about identity that were fluid, that were complex, that were layered, that exposed the underlayers. So then that led me to, and also along with activist work and being introduced to some of the culture jamming of the 90s and hacktivist tactics and strategies. So that led me to performative action. So I was kind of more interested in not necessarily the camera's ability to document it and create portraits, but maybe the camera's ability to document a critical political actor in real time in space. And so I started doing, and I grew up in LA, the center of the image factory, the center of like where like the mythologies are created. And I was very aware of how damaging those mythologies were, especially in the 90s, how violent they were and the implications. They legitimize like hundreds of millions of dollars and the incarceration of a whole generation. And so I wanted to find ways to disrupt those hegemonies. So I looked at public space and looked at the grand narratives as depicted by public monuments, and which are, are very militaristic and very colonial. And I began to make my own guerrilla plaques of erased histories and insert them in public space. And so the camera became just a tool to document those actions. And so like moving 20-something years like onward, I still do documentary photography, and I'm interested in understanding the production of space, the production of urban space, and the capitalist and colonialist underpinnings and the power dynamics that have been built into space. So I'm interested in excavating the underlayers of the city to expose and understand like the power dynamics that are actually built into the city. So that's a lot of landscape work, photographic landscape work. In this exhibit, I have work. I'm also interested in what's erased and excavating ruins of past history. So in this exhibit, I have a series of photos that document displaced barrio, one of the oldest barrios in the city, Chavez Ravine. And it's also a site of resistance. It's also a site of working class resistance to displacement. And also, so where the early work focused on social histories and excavating erased social histories, now I'm moving towards environmental histories. So thinking about the colonization of the land and looking at the interstitial spaces, the resiliency of ecologies to exist despite the, Los Angeles, like the obliteration of whole ecosystems. But those cracks in the system, those glitches are spaces of possibility. So a current project I have is called Les Bats. And there's over 20 species of bats living in Los Angeles. And so I'm interested in looking at ecologies of night, and the night also as another ecology and also an interstitial space, a crack where other possibilities can happen.
Thank you, Sandra. I just have to say, we're going to move on real quick, but I had to say my initial introduction into Sandra's work and eventually meeting you was what she called the Pocho Research Society. And it was membership of one. And, and I saw some of her early work. This is, I guess, in the 90s, right? And I saw what she was doing, and I thought it was incredible because I'd never seen anything quite like that. And it was very performative, but it was also very politically grounded, and it was dealing with the disruption of our space by other institutionalized forces.
But real quick, and many collaborators, including Raquel, who wrote one of the plaques for a series I did on displaced queer bars in Echo Park in downtown.
Right. So there's a whole process going on. But Christina, do you want to address that?
Well, I think I don't know who knows my work, who doesn't know my work, but over the last 30 years, I've definitely been doing performative work, right? Whether it's in my role as my great grandmother, Maria, and Maria's Great Expedition, whether it's early work that I did called Sin Cool, which was all about sort of addressing iconography of Catholicism and kind of reclaiming some of that iconography for myself. But documentary, I don't know. I mean, documentary, that's a really wide open definition. So I don't know if what I do is documentary. I mean, there's the laundromat series I have, the garment factory series I have. I don't know if that's a documentary. That's sort of more of a typology, right? So the word documentary has always been kind of, as applied to my work, has always been kind of weird for me, because I don't think of documentary as sort of a thing where you create a typology of places, let's say, or of architecture or of, spaces. So I have always gone back and forth between this idea of performing for the camera in some way, either as myself or playing somebody else, and back onto the streets, photographing spaces that are important to the Latinx community. So, this thing about going back and forth between the two major genres of photography, right? Landscape, cityscape, and portraiture, self-portraiture, performing for the camera, have always sort of been my go-to, right? It's been what I've incorporated in my work with whatever I wanted to say at the time. This new work that you see in the gallery is really quite a departure for me because it is neither documentary nor is it my performance for the camera, right? So it lies somewhere between the documentation that Bill Owens did of suburbia, let's say, and Gregory Crewdson sort of really elaborately staged. A lot of them are nightscapes, not all of them, elaborately staged photographs that almost feel like film stills, right? So for this new body of work, I'm a single mom of a beautiful boy. He turned 18. And it was kind of this time for me to just photograph him in homage to his life and the life that he's created as a young man in our suburban neighborhood. And I'm fascinated by boy culture because I have a boy. And all of the things that they, conjure together in their minds, and the things that they do together. I mean, obviously, this was not something that was part of my life. I had 2 brothers, and I was the punk artist outsider that had nothing to do with my family. I was out on the weekends. I rarely saw my family or dealt with my brothers at all. So this is kind of a new, world for me, let's say, this world of young men or people that are becoming young men, right? And so what I did with this work was kind of observe what their lives were, what their lives entailed, the things that they did together. And then instead of taking the camera and documenting it, right, there's that word, right? Picking up my camera and instantly, somehow getting an amazing photograph. I don't know, I actually can't do that often. I'm amazed at people who can. But looking at what they were doing, observing, and then coming up with scenarios in my head that felt very emblematic to me. And I also wanted to tie this a little bit to, filmmaking in the 70s and the 80s, because I always felt like my son should have grown up during the 70s. He's like a total gearhead. And I always thought he would have been, he would have been in heaven with American muscle cars and spending time in the garage fixing things and doing oil changes. And so I decided to, sort of bring in the visual what's the word, the visual look of a lot of films that were done in the late 70s and early 80s in order to conjure that era, right? And so the work is very much edited with that idea in mind. So they feel a little cinematic, right? So yes, they're staged, but they're only about me in that my son is a reflection of who I am and the world that I have created as his mother, right? And the relationships he has built within this world, right? And I look at these photographs and I think, you know, here's a young Chicano male in the midst of this suburban life with his diverse group of friends. And how often do we see that represented, even though it's the way that most of us live, right? Not that often, right? So although the work was atypical for me, because I'm usually doing something political or something about my neighborhood or something about myself in this role as a sort of iconic person or figure, I felt like this was work that was worthy of some attention from me, right? Although it felt very natural. And oftentimes, sometimes the easy things, the natural things don't feel like they should be on the wall sometimes. So, but I gave myself that space as a creative person to be able to do that. And, you know, I feel like I got a whole new audience with this work. Men. Men love this work, you know, because they look at it and they're like, I remember when I did that with my friends. I got a IG message of a young man telling me, I can even hear the crickets at night when I look at these photographs. And that made me so really, really happy. I love that I was able to do that because all the other work from the past, I don't know if you guys know my work, but yeah, super political, super directed, super, you know, and I just wanted to do this for my son and our relationship and, you know, celebrate him as this special person in my life.
So most of my work I started off documentary. Like I always like to document my life, my community, and then I started with my family. So like most of my major bodies of work are documentary based. And then I would say my last two bodies of work, the one that you're seeing is my newest body of work. It doesn't have a title yet. It's because I'm like really stern on titles. And like I always say like they're like albums. So when like I drop an album, like the title has to be like very concise. So to be determined. But it's connected to my last body of work. It's part 2 of By the Water. By the water, I stand and stare into the sun. So this is part 2. They were a departure for me because since I always primarily did documentary work and then also portraiture, because those two I just was always drawn to. These two bodies of work were a departure because they were performative. They had this doesn't really have the archival pieces in, but they have archival pieces in, which, you know, when I went to ELAC for my technical training, I always say there was like, the idea was like you could never bring in an image that you didn't create personally with your camera. And then I went to art school and it was like anything can be your image, you know, there was like, you know, appropriation. I was like, oh, cool. But, you know, then there's the idea that it's not appropriation if it's your family stuff. So, you know, I started to intertwine personal archive. And why it's important to then become performative, the archive and everything like that is because almost all my family is gone. And people get sad for me, but it's kind of what Sandra said, is that because, you know, the prison industrial complex, the drugs and Reagan and everything. And so like my work, although it's beautiful, quote unquote, and I say quote unquote is because there's a reason why there's one person in the images. I'm not me. I'm not, it's not a self-portrait. It's a performative person standing in for everybody that should be there at this moment and that is dead, you know, and that shouldn't be dead, you know? So again, yes, it's pretty. There's this pretty lady at the water or migrating, or there's these places, but everybody is gone, you know? And so, and I hate being photographed. So the fact that I'm doing this means something, you know, that I have to now be the stand-in for everybody that is gone and that should not be gone right now. And so like you make these choices, you know, it's like it could easily get a motto or something like that, but also like this really sick thing is that everyone in my family, we look like carbon copies of each other. So it was really cute when we were all alive because it's like, oh, there's that one and there's that one. But when there's only a few of us left, it's like, it's sad, you know? But so then I stand in for everybody, the past and possibly the future, you know? And so that's where then the narrative came in, the performative aspect, the archive, because I actually can't bring in those people anymore. And it becomes more about geopolitical, about migration, about drugs, about everything. I mean, there's just so much more, you know, but it's an illusion because it's just beautiful pictures, but it starts, you're like, wait, where is everybody else? So, yeah.
We have a little bit of time. I have one more question, and one of the
Thank
I
you.
guess one of the obvious one of the obvious absences here is Laura Aguilar, who is in the show, but she's not here. Laura passed in 2018. And I wanted to bring her into, even though who said she was, Amina said she is here, and she probably is here, we had the show with her blessing, but I wanted to throw out a question, and I'd like Amina to answer this because we had a real nice conversation about this. And the question is, Laura Aguilar is considered one of the most important American photographers today. Like yourself, she was a Southern California-based Chicana photographer. Can you share your thoughts on Laura's work and speak to the influence of Laura and or her work in your work?
So the interesting thing that I kind of answered in the first question is, right, I didn't see anyone that looked like me when I was coming up. And I knew I wanted to do photography. I did a lot of landscapes also because I was extremely shy and could not interact with people on that level. I didn't know how. But I always felt something was missing. So I went to undergrad at Parsons School of Design, which at the time was like one of the top photo schools in the country. I have dedicated my life to photography, and I've never heard about Laura at all. And a friend of mine invited me to her like retrospective at the Exactly. Yeah. Or Brunel. And a friend of mine invited me to Laura's exhibition at the Vincent Price Museum at ELAC. And I had like a minor anxiety panic attack because it was literally the first time in my life I saw myself on the walls after dedicating my life to photography. And it just opened up my world. And in the middle of that show, I decided I was going to go to grad school and that I wanted to be a part of the conversation and that I could be a part of the conversation. And then I realized how small I was, but that the world kept me small by not seeing myself, by not seeing my community. And I was like, oh no, this is not acceptable. literally fuck all these people. I am going to enter an international conversation, and I am going to force myself to be in these spaces. And so it's amazing actually to be in the show is blowing my mind. To be a part of this lineage is literally a dream. And so, right, seeing Laura's work, I was like, oh, I count, and I started shooting portraits, and I shot queer brown punks, queer BIPOC punks, specifically in East LA. Then I started photographing them in Mexico, thinking like what's similar and a little different between our communities. Then I went to Colombia, Peru, and photographed and tried to find queer punks throughout the Americas. And I don't know if I don't consider that documentary because people are so performative. And that's what I love. Like, I just want to tell the story that's so important to me. When I started photographing these queer punks, it was in Montebello. There was like certain nights where there was parties, or I would go to backyard events, backyard drag shows. And every time I asked someone to take their photo, even though they were like in their look, like their best look, their best makeup, I mean, just amazing. And they would always stop, and I could see this like unseen kid, and they would go, "Who, me?" And it would break my heart because, I mean, multiple times a night I would hear, "Who, me? You want to photograph me?" And I was like, yes, you in all this beauty, this is what I want. And it was amazing. It transformed my life. And to be seen by someone in your community, celebrated in your community, especially, right? Like the outsiders of the outsiders. A lot of these kids are undocumented. A lot of them can no longer live at home because they're queer. And to be able to move freely in that, because I've shown up as myself, I've shown up vulnerable, I've shown up with ambition, but naked, at like straight up saying, if this photo is great, I would like to show this in, somewhere. And I think you have to really do that to photograph, to do portraits. You have to really, that's how I manage it morally. But kind of going back to Laura, this would not have happened if I did not go to that exhibit. So having these shows of BIPOC, of women photographers, of brown, it is life-changing. So thank you.
Thank you. The talk was great. We're going to have a Q&A if any of you have questions, but I just wanted to say this in closing. I want to thank all the artists for being in the show, for being here in Arizona and Tucson, for being on the panel, for saying all these amazing things that you said that really illustrates the show in a very profound way. But also we have a lot of LA represented here. So a lot of friends of mine from LA. We have Baldwin Park represented here. We have, Cerritos, Norwalk, Boyle Heights, El Sereno. Yeah, LA, Chavez Ravine, it's all here. And so, so for those of you that don't know LA, or pretty much the east side of LA, it's represented by these artists here. Anyway, that's it. I think we're going to have a Q&A. I hope some of you have some questions.
Thanks, Sybil. Yeah, we have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So if you have a question for the artists or for Sybil, you can raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you. We'd love to open it up.
Amina, I'm really interested in what you said about your shyness. And so did seeing Laura's show change your shyness, or how do you manage that part of your personality in order to make the work that you make?
That's funny. It did she did play a part in that. And I realized it was to my detriment, my shyness. It was so bad. I couldn't look at people in the eye. I just, was a little shell. So what I did was I said hello to everyone I walked by for an entire year. I greeted everyone. And that literally broke my shyness. And I had a huge, though, emotional arc. So when I was doing that, I would whisper like, "Hi, how are you?" And then they wouldn't say something and I'd be butthurt and I'd be like, "Oh my God." And I mean, and it was so internal. No one had an idea of what was happening. But for me, it was such growth. And by the end of the year, now it's this obnoxious, like, "Hey, how you doing? Let's chat." But then from there, it completely changed my photography. And now I do these portraits. So yeah.
Hi, I'm from East LA and Honeymoon Park. My name's Wanda. My question is for Sybil and for the photographers as well. I'm wondering if you could comment on, I'm just seeing this punk thread. And I'm wondering if you could comment on the relationship of photography and punk.
Yeah, a lot of us came up punk, but I think it's that freedom for me. It was that able to explore who I was, push back for the first time, and just be wild. I couldn't be wild. I had a very kind of military life. And so when I found punk, I felt kind of seen, even though I grew up with white punks, but they were also the only ones talking about classism, and things that I dealt with on a daily basis, racism, that maybe my other friends didn't. And, this group was like, "Oh no, this exists and we're against it." Even though there's, issues within any kind of scene or subculture. But so that allowed me then to be creative and then push forward with photography.
At least for me, like growing up in Boyle Heights, I grew up in the 2000s, early 2000s, and the 90s were so bad with gangs. And most of my family were in gangs. My mom was like an ex-cholo, so she had retired when she had me. And so for me, I thought like gang culture was lame. That was like something your mom did. You know what I mean? So like, but like for real, right? So, but also, so punk is like sort of like your salvation, So it's like you have to sort of be, I mean, I became a punk because it was like the counterculture to gang, right? So, and for me, it was like freedom from rejecting what was the mainstream culture, which was like hip hop and gang culture and stuff like that. So that was like a total rejection to me in the early 2000s. I feel like there's a lot more, but for me, that was it. Like it was rejecting my mom and my uncles and all that stuff. I was like, oh, that's so lame, and like also just like totally like everything that like punk stands for, so it was like totally the opposite of that. And, it just taught me everything. And I feel like now there's so much, and I see my little nephew going through that, and he's like, oh, what do you old people know? And it's like, like the same thing. But it's like everything where Amina said, it's just like rejection and like feeling like you just want to be found within your common peers, And I feel like that helped me grow. And again, the incredible shyness. I don't think I would have been able to start making images without just being within a community.
I caught the tail end of the 1970s punk movement, which was incredibly political and incredibly like DIY, incredibly diverse and inclusive. I didn't have the same experience that my peers had in high school, where there was these groups of people kind of based on their social status as socias or popular people, unpopular people, geeks. The punk movement was an aside. It was running along a side, right? And it was something that you could jump into if you were a creative person, a queer person, a brown person, or whatever, if you were different in any way and you didn't want to engage in those more mainstream type of high school associations, right? So for me, the punk movement was incredibly important. There was an East Side punk movement for sure. And so being 16 years old, I didn't have to go clear across town to go to a gig. I could go to El Sereno, I could go to Boyle Heights, you know. And so this became a huge part of my life and also a huge part of like the associations I would make creatively for years and years and years to come. So yeah, really, really super important to my creative life. The idea of let's do what we want and let's do it outside of the mainstream. Let's be as political as we want, as sexual as we want, as DIY as we want. You know, we shopped at thrift stores and got our entire wardrobe at thrift stores. Now this is the thing that we're supposed to do, right? We were doing it then. So, and in addition to that, it was so much goddamn fun, right? I mean, so much fun. And, you know, I think that that freedom and that fun and being that outsider felt like being an insider. And I felt accepted in that space. And that was really huge. Yeah.
Yeah. I was also incredibly shy, maybe still am. And I was a little too young to experience the first wave of punk, but was exposed to, but also got introduced to underground culture in LA and East LA and backyard parties at a time just before like punk had been codified, before you could buy docs at like at the mall, Hot Topic, the age of Hot Topic. You know, so I was introduced to the sphere where there were no codes, but there was a spirit of rebellion and invention and creating one's own language with humor, with fun, with irreverence. And that was really attractive. And there was just so much possibility in that. So that kind of spirit is something I've always been attracted to. And I still find, I still manage to create community. Maybe it's not necessarily punk, but it is that kind of subversive, playful, youthful, innovative attitude that people create space. So I think also punk, was really important in terms of like just witnessing how we can create our own spaces, and we can create our own possibilities.
Great question. There's one more.
I think we have time for one last question.
So my question is to the lady with the mask. Sorry, I don't know your name, but I know you all talk about the punk and all that, but I saw more like kind of poetic, you know, in your scene of all the sites of like very much like a performance art. To remind me even of Ana Maria with her earthwork and stuff like that. So I didn't really felt the punk there, but I wanted to ask you about, were you potentially having in mind the performance art and the symbolism with the water and the plants and all that? Does that have to do with the immigration, or just if you can elaborate a little bit about that, and then the shots that were taken, where you actually have a still camera taking it, or how it was taken, how it's handling. So that's, sorry, to the one in the middle with the mask. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And you're
Thank
asking
you.
if like some of the influences like Ana Mendieta or Mendieta. Actually, I just made some new work, like really recently, And I was thinking, I was like, oh, wow, like I was thinking about her, but not making the work, but I thought about her after. You know what I mean? So the images that you see, they're all taken with a medium format camera. So all of it's like all supposed to be like poetic. And so it's all like, but it's all going to be like incomplete poems, you know? So it's like, you know, like they're all going to be lines in a poem, but the poem will never be complete. It'll always be fractured. The narrative is non-linear. The way I always explain my work is that it's the way that you think about histories and especially the way that you think about familiar histories. Like how I can explain it is like when you tell a story that's been passed on for generations, and that it's also the way that we process memory, right? So it's like, oh, well, I went to the party and like Martha was there. Oh no, wait, Martha and Jose were there. Oh wait, no, was it and that it becomes, right? So the way you remember it, and then you never remember it the right way, right? That we remember it in a way that it rewires, and then it becomes very fractured, so that, and it's non-linear. So that's how the way that work is, that you think it's linear, like, again, that as the viewer you want to process it in a linear way, but that it jumps back from you know, contemporary time to a time from before, and that you just want to make sense of it, but it's always going to be fragmented. Because again, me as the person that's thinking about all the information that I know from ancestors that have passed, from people that are alive, that they also only know parts of it, you know? So it's just histories that I know, people that have told me things, and then people that are gone and that I will never know, you know? So it's this fragmented poetic, you know, stories. So I don't know if that helps you, but yeah. So.
I think we're out. You want one more question?
This is for Sybil and for the poet. And can you talk a little bit about how that evolved? Because that's a big part of this exhibition too, is the written word with the exhibition.
So the poet Raquel Gutierrez, how that happened? Well, when we were putting together the exhibit, I didn't understand at the time, or didn't know this, but there was an interdisciplinary, I guess, gallery mission to all of their projects. And so we needed to integrate something a little bit more, have a little bit more diversity. And so actually this was kind of cool how it came about, because I was working with Denise and she said, well, you know, we could bring in a poet. I go, what's that going to look like? She goes, we could bring in a writer, we could bring in a poet. And immediately I thought of Raquel. And I thought of Raquel because I knew Raquel from LA. I knew she was here in Tucson. Oh yeah, Phoenix. I knew she was here in Tucson, and I knew she knew all of the artists. And it was funny because when I actually finally did talk to Raquel, I go, well, all the artists I think you know, but I'm not sure if you know Amina Cruz. And then she goes, oh yeah, Amina shot my wedding, so our wedding photos. So that was even more perfect, that she not only knew Amina, but she, you know, had a close relationship with her. She has written about Laura Aguilar. Being from LA, I knew she knew all of these artists. And so she was the perfect pick. And then we talked about her bringing her in and having her write poems about each of the artists. And then later it became a visual part of the show where she actually hand wrote her poems. And you also painted too. Yeah, so she basically created those panels. So that was how that part came about.
Thanks, Sybil. Well, Raquel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, what I'm really just vibing off is just the history in the making, and this incredible gathering, and of course the multi-generational, but all the way that the threads and ideas just are converging so organically, beautifully, and on Sybil's note, I was like, and now let's go see the show. But yeah, it was a pleasure to think about this work and to respond ekphrastically, but also seeing the threads coming together through everyone's work here. I called my section Chicana Infrastructures, just because I feel like those are the ways that these are various systems that each artist is thinking through that structure the various sort of radical relationalities that are that emerge in the work here, and the way that LA is also such an interesting, powerful infrastructure that's seen through your lenses, literally.
Thank you.
Thank you for participating in.
Well, thanks everyone once more for coming, and thanks to the artists and to Sybil as well. And now we'd like to invite you to join us outside for a reception and to see the wonderful exhibition. Yeah. Thanks.